Hi, welcome to Closer with Kathryn. Today we are shooting at the Beaufort National Cemetery, and as you see behind me, there are the graves of many different wars, hundreds of years of veterans here. And because of Memorial Day weekend that is upon us, I want to take a moment and honor our veterans and our soldiers who are here. And we're going to have a tour. We're going to meet with a couple of gentlemen. We'll have Jeff Applegate and also Joe Dorman. And I've also included Zach Green, who is very much involved with, well, he was a Marine by heart, and he's a Marine, always a Marine is that they say, but he also works with veterans and entrepreneurs and helping them life after. So I think our show is going to be really interesting, and please stay with us because we're going to honor our veterans. I want to introduce you to Zachary Green. And I brought Zachary on the show for a couple of reasons. Number one, you are a Marine, even though you are a retired Marine, but I guess you're never not a Marine, correct?
Once a Marine, always a Marine.
Always Marine. And we're going to talk a little bit about your military career and what Memorial Day weekend means to you. And also, Zachary's been very involved with helping veterans come out when they retire from the military to get into the working force, civilian world, and entrepreneurs. So let's start off with your military career. But before we look at the headstones here, we have someone from World War II. We have the Korean-Vietnam War, and in the back there's little tombstones, and those are from the Civil War. So getting back to you.
This is very sacred ground. We're around some real heroes here. It's very special to be here.
I agree with you, and that's why I really wanted to do this show in the honor of all of our veterans. Let's start with being a Marine, and what did that do for, how did that change your life?
You know, the Marines are kind of a rare breed amongst all people in the military. You can always tell a Marine because they usually have the Marine Corps flag flying in their house or the bumper sticker on their car. But I don't know why, ever since a very young kid, I wanted to be a Marine. I was always G.I. Joe, dressing up in Halloween, and just something about that honor, that courage, that commitment, and the uniform, and just being at the leading edge of the defense of our freedoms in our country. It was something that I've always wanted to do, and when I got in, it was just an incredible experience.
And how long were you in?
So I was not in for a whole long time. I was in from 91 to 99. I got in right as hostilities with Desert Storm were winding down. I did both enlisted and then went through the officer candidate program. But it was during the Clinton years. There was a lot of attrition. There was no combat deployments, and I wanted to go off and fight. Yeah. So I ended up getting out, and then 2 years later, September 11th happened. Obviously changed our world as we know it, and I felt so guilty that I'd left the Marines, so I became a firefighter, and I continued to serve my country, but this time from the inside, being a firefighter, which I did for about 10 or 15 years.
When we think of Memorial Day, what comes to mind?
You know, it's not a day for picnics. It's not a day what everybody thinks is, oh, it's the start of summer, let's have a big barbecue or whatever. This is a very sacred day. Veterans Day is a day that's happy and we honor veterans, but Memorial Day is about this. It's about the men and women that gave their lives for our country, and it goes all the way back to the Civil War, actually. It was called Decoration Day. In the late 1800s, you know, the country was still very separated and still angry from the war, and it was a way for them all to come together to honor both the Confederate and the Union soldiers. And eventually that morphed into Memorial Day as we know it today.
Yeah. And what about the flag?
You know, the flag for the veteran is really a sacred icon. It's more than just a piece of cloth with the red, white, and blue colors. This is what we salute every day. If you go on to every single military base, in the morning and in the afternoon, we have reveille and we have taps. Everybody on the base has to stop, get out of their car, come to attention or salute. At the end of the day, when we play taps to let everyone know it's time to kind of wrap the day up, we salute it. It is something that we will literally, these gentlemen that were in the Civil War, that was the position of honor, was carrying that flag. If that flag drops, somebody else would immediately pick it up, knowing that that is the person they're going to probably shoot first because you've got that big target. And then finally, in a sacred place like this, the flag is going to be the last thing that our veterans have draped over their coffin before they're ultimately lowered into the ground. So for veterans and hopefully for most Americans, this is something that's very important, and it's so important that when we're at a sporting event or something, to just give it the respect that it deserves, because everybody in here They died for this flag.
I never really realized the integrity. Well, I have the integrity of the flag, yes, but and the purpose in the marine life. So I didn't know that.
Yeah, again, for anybody in the military, that is what it represents, the freedom, but more importantly, the sacrifice. You know, I think one of the reasons it's red and white, the red is for the blood that we've spilled for our country. Mm-hmm. The other thing about the flag that a lot of people know is when they see the flag sometimes on a side of an airplane or in a uniform, you always see the blue part. We call that the field. The Union is facing forward. The reason why is when you're carrying your flag into battle, the blue part's always going to be going forward. If you were going this way, coming away from the battle, then the stripes would be forward. That means you're retreating. So our flag always goes forward, is never retreating. That's why you see that flag backwards sometimes on uniforms or on airplanes or other types of vehicles.
I didn't know that. So let's talk a little bit about, you know, now that you are in civilian life, you've been very much involved with the Veterans program, where you want to help them. In fact, with the Don Ryan Center, which is located in Bluffton, they're helping military to get back into civilian life. Mm-hmm. So tell me about that.
Well, I'll be honest with you. It doesn't come from necessarily a reason of altruism. It comes from guilt. I feel guilty that I let my brothers and sisters down by only doing one tour in the Marine Corps, by getting out before September 11th happened. Now, obviously, I didn't know that. Had I known that, I would have stuck in. But I still feel like I need to serve our country, even though I'm not in uniform anymore. And the best way that I can serve is to teach my fellow veterans what I learned both in the military but also in the civilian world of how to grow and run a business. I started a company out of the trunk of my car. I grew it into $30 million within a couple of years. It was very difficult, but if it wasn't for those core attributes I learned in the Marine Corps of grit, adaptability, integrity, courage, morality, I would have never have been able to survive. And so that's my mission now, is to give back to my fellow veterans in the best way that I know how, and that is, building and growing a business.
You know, it's interesting you bring that up, because I've also spoken to other veterans, and you'd be so surprised at the knowledge that they do have in the IT world, in the cybersecurity, things that we civilians have no idea what their knowledge is. They may not understand some of the things that we do here, but their training is so intense and so specific. They're so smart to be able to do these technical jobs to facilitate whatever we need to be done.
It's resourcefulness, it's their adaptability, it's the focus on mission accomplishment, that no matter what you do, the veteran is going to complete their mission. The self-discipline, which means them doing the right thing when nobody else is around. And those are the things that you get in the workforce that you just simply can't learn if you haven't had a chance to serve in the military. Those intangibles are really what you combine with some of the intellect that you talked about, some of the people that are in avionics or in nuclear repair or communications, or like your father that was a code breaker. That's high intellect, but it's more about that grit and those intangibles on top of that really makes it special.
Very much. So anything else we can share with me before we go on? Because next we're going to take a tour of the cemetery. We're going to meet a couple of gentlemen who are very knowledgeable about the history, and we're going to get wonderful lessons and being able to teach about the history here. What do you think?
Well, when I come here, it's very special for me and my other fellow vets. The connection that you have in the military goes back eons of time. I mean, during Shakespeare, I think it was Henry V, where he gave the famous quote, we few, we marry few, we band of brothers, those who shed their blood with me will forever be my brothers. These are all brothers. Yep. This is one big family plot. This is not this section or that section. This is a whole family plot. And we spend that short amount of time together serving and bleeding together and crying together and sweating together. And that brotherhood bond is incredible. We may not see each other again for another 50, 70, or 80 years, but everybody around here is now with their brothers now, and they finally have come back, and I can imagine there's probably some good stories and some good gambling and smoking and joking going on here late at night.
I agree with you. I do. I'm sort of getting choked up as you talk about that. Well said, Zach. I appreciate that. All right, so now we're going to go off and continue our journey here.
Great, thank you.
As we start off our tour here at the cemetery, I want to introduce you to Jeff Applegate, who is the Assistant Director. Very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
And thanks for joining us. There's so much to cover, but before we go too far into it, I want to talk about the sign behind us, because to my understanding, every cemetery has this plaque and has these words by Abraham Lincoln.
Yes, ma'am.
and that's amazing. So tell us the story behind that.
Really, we consider Abraham Lincoln probably the father of the National Cemetery Administration, and so because of that, we honor him with his famous address for the Gettysburg Address itself, and so that's something we do at every cemetery, national cemetery, to honor him. We just have his words basically for everyone to see and be reminded of when they visit the cemetery. So as the Civil War was winding down, he wanted to unite the Union and Confederacy again as one nation, and so his promise or his pledge was to take care of veterans and their families. And so that's kind of where the National Cemetery Administration ultimately came from, was based on his words and his promise to take care of the veterans and their families.
Well, those are endearing words. They've lasted hundreds of years. Before we go again further on, tell us a little about the history, because this is one of the unique ones we have in our country, correct?
Yes, ma'am. What it has, in 1862, Congress passed legislation to authorize the president to establish national cemeteries. So as the Civil War was going on across battlefields, they were looking for things to do for those who had been killed in battle, and so they wanted to establish national cemeteries to do that. So 1862, Congress authorized it. In 1863, President Lincoln authorized Beaufort to be one of those sites for a national cemetery. And so land was purchased at the time, 29 acres for the large sum of $75 was purchased by the local commanding general for the area. And then that's when they started doing interments for Civil War soldiers at that point.
As we look at today, this is 2022, and in fact, we've seen 2 funerals come in today, which takes a heartbeat from me, because
Yes,
as a person that has served for our country. Is this, when they come to the cemetery, do soldiers get to choose where they want to go? Do the veterans say, this is where I'd like to be buried?
Yes, ma'am. There's National Cemetery Administration has 155 cemeteries across the country, and so once they're determined eligible, those veterans can pick any of those cemeteries they want to be buried. So if you're from this area, you can come back to Beaufort. A lot of Marines do, because they went through Parris Island boot camp, so they want to come back what they consider home for their final resting place. But you're eligible for any national cemetery if you're an eligible veteran.
And so in this one, it continues to grow and grow, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And do we have an idea until what year or span? Or
Right now, with the projected expansions that we have within the cemetery, we're estimating until 2065 there'll be space available for an interment here. So that's what we're looking at for right now. And of course, that's always dependent on the ebb and flow of how many pass away at any given date, and go from there.
Well, thank you for our introduction, because there is so much more to see, so continue, because we're going to learn about the style of the gravestones, the history. I mean, there's just so much to do, and I'm not the expert, so let's go find the expert this way. Well, I'm delighted to have Joe Dorman, who's the program specialist here at the cemetery, because you're a wealth of knowledge, and and each part of the cemetery has its own history, its story. And so we're going to start here, what was once known as the Rebel section, correct?
Correct.
So behind me, there's you can see where there's tombstones of 2 different sort of facades on them. And something has changed in the past 6 years. So tell us about the story, because I don't know the answer.
Sure. You know, originally the Confederates weren't even allowed to be in the National Cemetery, and prior to the headstones that you see here with the point on them, they were similar to the Union stones, with the exception of they did not have the shield on them, but they did have the Southern Cross of Honor. In 1929, they changed those headstones to what we see today. We had a gentleman in here about 6 years ago that saw the headstone of a relative from the Civil War and wanted to get the spelling corrected on his headstone. We told them that we don't do that with historic stones. We can't correct the spelling, but he said, well, the other problem was he was not a Confederate soldier, he was a Union soldier. So after contact was made with the historians in DC, they said, don't do anything yet. And they went back and checked all the records for every soldier here in this section, because obviously they have better access today. And it turned out there was about 15 Union soldiers in this section. So,
oh my, that's That's interesting.
Right.
And so it looks like it's all been corrected now?
It has
Little
been
diligence
corrected.
in trying to make sure we have all the records?
It took several months after he stopped in to get everything done and get the headstones reordered. All the veterans groups in the area were contacted, and there was a formal ceremony for the new headstones here in what was referred to as the Confederate section or Rebel section, and now we simply call it another Civil War section. So again, you can look and see the difference in the stones.
Right.
The Union stones have the shield, and the gentleman over here on the first row, Cheney, according to his relative, it should have been spelled Chamey, but that's what started the whole process of making sure that these veterans were recognized under the actual army that they fought under.
You know, as we walk, thank you for that. And
Sure.
as we walk along the cemetery, we see these beautiful trees, and they're called witness trees.
Witness trees.
If you pan over here, you can see this beautiful tree, and it has the Spanish moss. And when you do a pan of the whole cemetery, you see these trees that are just the umbrellas. So tell us about that.
The trees, and most of them were placed, the cemetery was built around many of them because they're upwards of 450, 500 years or older. And they're referred to as witness trees because they have been here since before the cemetery ever arrived here, and they have witnessed the history around this area.
That's amazing. So let's continue on our journey because the cemetery is sectioned off. It's sectioned off, right, into different wars. And tell us about the different wars that we have here.
We have soldiers that are interred here from as far back as the Second Seminole Wars. When I tell that to people, they say, well, wait a minute, you guys didn't open until the 1860s. How do you have Second Seminole War? Well, we had some graves that were relocated from Old Fort Johnson on James Island back in 1912. And so we've got a couple of the Second Seminole War veterans buried over in Section 60.
In the population that we have here, I mean, between Civil War, World War I, World War II, do we have a section that's fuller, more populated than the other sections in this particular cemetery?
Well, if you look throughout the historic section, you'll see a mix of the modern era stones like we see right over here, and then the Civil War stones. Civil War stones are those small curved ones with the shield on them. The little squares represent the Civil War unknowns that we have here in the cemetery. We have approximately 9,000 Civil War interments here, and about half of those are unknowns. When you look around, you'll see the modern era stones mixed in with them because as time went past and they were continuing to inter, the modern era stones got mixed into the sections with them.
And do we have all the armed services, Navy, Air Force, Marine, Army?
We have soldiers from all the branches, soldiers and sailors and airmen from all the branches, dating back to the opening of the cemetery. We've got Coast Guard as well, don't want to leave them out.
Oh, that's right, I meant to say Coast Guard. We love Coast Guards.
Yep. And we even have, Russell Gerd. He is a German POW buried here.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, let's stop here and let's
Sure.
continue on. We'll go find Jeff.
Okay.
And before we go too much further, I wanted to tell you that Joe and Jeff are both veterans from military armed forces. Now, the question is what did you serve? Where did you serve? And we'll start with you, Jeff.
All right, I was in the Army for almost 22 years. So I started out with military intelligence. My last year was with force structure. So we designed what the Army was going to look like 5 years in the future. So served pretty much everywhere. Was in Germany twice. Served in the Pentagon. I was in the Pentagon when 9/11 hit, so I was in the building when the plane crashed into it.
Oh my goodness.
So then from there, retired after 22 years, taught junior ROTC in high school for about 6 years, and then decided to look for something different. And luckily enough to find this job and coming to the National Cemetery Administration.
Well, that's what an interesting career, and mine did, and the 9/11 on top of it. I mean, I had a girlfriend who was there too, and she was in the building that was fortified beside,
Yep.
and it's amazing. That still gives me chills when I think about that. And Joe, and where was your alliance?
I was in the Air Force.
Okay.
6 members of my family, including myself, have retired from the Air Force. I was born at Offutt Air Force Base and enlisted myself in 1976. Having been a dependent, thought I was going to travel the world on my own for a change. They sent me direct from basic training to Maxwell Air Force Base, where I stayed for 12 and a half years.
So much for the travel program.
Exactly. I went to Guam from there, where I was at for 3 years, and then to Little Rock Air Force Base, where I retired in 1996.
Wow.
When I retired from healthcare administration in the Air Force, I managed the TRICARE network for the state of Arkansas for about a year and a half. Eventually went into civil service there in the same hospital I retired from, and then came to South Carolina in 2003, did a few odd jobs, and ultimately wound up with the National Cemetery Administration by way of the construction management portion of it when they were building Fort Jackson National Cemetery. And I moved down here 5 years ago this month.
Wow, you know what, your stories are so interesting, and it's amazing how you start someplace and the passion of being part of the armed services, and it's taken you on this journey to many places. And behind me, I wanted to ask you, Joe, we have a brick coffin. What do we call this? It's a...
Simply call it a monument.
Monument.
Yes.
And on this monument, I want to point out there's quite a few names, and how many are there?
There are 175 names on here from various states, and they're identified by the state where they served from during the Civil War.
And we're stopping by the monument from the 55th Massachusetts, and
Correct.
This is really interesting because this recently happened. So Joe, can you tell us about it?
In 1987, there were some relic hunters on Folly Beach, and they started to unearth remains and artifacts from the Civil War. The archaeologists eventually came in and determined that these were soldiers, 19 soldiers, they believed to be from the 55th Massachusetts. They fought alongside the 54th Massachusetts that fought at Fort Wagner. They brought them here in 1989 on Memorial Day for the interment. And we had a lot of special folks here for that service. Governor Dukakis from Massachusetts came down and was the keynote speaker for the interment of these 19 soldiers.
We find the great Santini, and as you can see, Donald Conroy. There's a lot. He was a colonel, right, Joe?
Yes, he was.
And also, he was
a fighter pilot.
A fighter pilot with the Black Sheep Squadron, correct?
Correct.
And he has many honors as well.
He does.
Tell us about his career.
Well, as you can see there, he served in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. And as you mentioned, flew with the Black Sheep Squadron. A lot of people remember him from the movie and the book that was written by his son, Pat Conroy. And movie and book aside, what I see is an American hero. He has the 3 distinguished flying crosses, and he had 5 air medals for his valor in battle during those conflicts.
You know, it's interesting. You really never know, do we? You just never know.
You
Well,
don't.
that was quite unique. Well, as we finish our tour, Joe, there we have Mr. Ralph Henry Johnson, a Medal of Honors. Tell me about this gentleman.
Private First Class Ralph Henry Johnson served during the Vietnam War. On the date of his death, there was a battle, and there were 2 other guys with him in a foxhole when a grenade came in. Ralph, he didn't hesitate, and he dove onto the grenade and saved the other 2 people that were in the foxhole with him. He was originally buried just outside Charleston, but his mother asked that he be buried here in the National Cemetery, and he was moved here around 1990. Ralph Johnson, you may be familiar with the name here in the Lowcountry. The VA Medical Center is named after Private First Class Johnson, as is a Navy ship that was commissioned in his name just a few years ago.
Well, you know, it's really interesting how that name has carried on through our low country.
And always will.
Well, as we close the show, I want to thank Jeff and Joe for your time, your expertise in sharing this journey with us and tour of the cemetery. As we finalize, I'd love to get your perspective. You know, Memorial Day is here, we're honoring it, and I'd like to get your thoughts because you are here and you're part of this. So I'll start with you, Joe.
My family has a long history of military service. To this day, I still have relatives that are active duty in the Army and the Navy. And for me, having been in healthcare for 27 years with the Air Force, I come to the National Cemetery Administration with an appreciation for all of what all veterans do from all branches. And it's my honor to be available for the veterans today to help get them ready and prepared for their final honors.
Well, thank you for that. And what about you, Jeff?
And I think so. I think I echo what Joe said. Our mission here is to take care of veterans and their families when the time of need, when they pass, but also to commemorate what they've done, their achievements, and the sacrifices they made for the country. So we continue to do that, and we just take pride in doing it.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, thank you. So I also want to thank you for joining us. You know, we want to thank all of our armed services around the world, and we want to honor our veterans. Thanks for joining us.